My friend, at different times in our history, different cities have been the focal point of a radiating American spirit. In the 18th century, for example, Boston was the center of a political radicalism that ignited a shot that was heard around the world. In the 19th century, New York became a symbol of the idea of a melting pot of America. In the 20th century, Chicago, city of big shoulders and heavy winds, came to symbolize the industrial energy and dynamism of America. For a while now, many look to the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, as a metaphor of our national character and aspiration, with its 30-foot-high picture of a slot machine and chorus girl. For as we all know, Las Vegas is a city entirely devoted to entertainment, and as such proclaims the spirit of a culture in which the public discourses increasingly take the form of entertainment. Isn't that what this afternoon is all about? The Super Bowl? Isn't it about entertainment, with over 1 billion people that will watch that game this afternoon? You realize that over $4.2 billion will be bet on that game in one way or another? And that's not including money that's bet under the table. Do you realize that 1.25 billion chicken wings will be sold today? Those poor chickens. Neil Postman states that we are a people on the verge of amusing ourselves to death. I think he's right. Our Western society is consumed with the pursuit of pleasure. From practically every corridor of our culture, advice streams forth, encouraging us to make immediate happiness our ultimate goal. To accommodate this advice, more sources of entertainment have been provided for us than any other civilization in human history. With so much time and energy, my friend, think of it, being invested in our achievement of earthly joy, one would think that we would be thoroughly content by now. But if that were true, John Gardner points out, we would be telling one another frequently of our unparalleled bliss rather than trading tranquilizers that we prescribe for each other. The fact is, we show all the signs of a people who are receiving the wages of sin. We see increase in drug abuse, alcoholism, mental illness, child abuse, divorce, suicide, murder. The hard evidence shows that our quality of life is not getting better, it's getting worse. And obvious as this seems, our efforts in finding lasting happiness apart from God stands undone. Rather than facing this reality, we continue to pursue a dream that's showing itself to be a nightmare. Hopefully, we've been listening to the prophet Jeremiah as he laments. These are timeless warnings that sin, what it promises, never delivers. Only God can bring us the lasting satisfaction that we desire. So once again, let's open our eyes as we bring this series to a close, to see and hear what God wants to teach us, through this final chapter of Lamentations. The 5th chapter of Lamentations records the prayer of Judah's survivors. They were gripped by a spirit of grief. They were mourning. The older folks in the community no longer gathered for their daily fellowship. The elders of the city no longer gathered at the gates of the city to do business. All social and administrative affairs of Israel have come to an end because of the devastation of war. There is a loss of joy. Their dancing has turned to mourning. The crown and glory of life had fallen off the people's heads. The people recount the tragedy that they have experienced there in verses 2 through 6. Listen to it again. Our inheritance has been turned over to aliens, our homes to foreigners. We've become orphans and fatherless, our mothers like widows. We must buy the water we drink. Our food can be had only, our wood can only be had at a price. Those who pursue us are at our heels. We are weary and find no rest. We submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough bread. And why do they go through that? What's the reasoning behind that? That they have experienced this predicament. Did you notice what they said in verse 7? Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. In other words, Dad did it. They're blaming their past. They're refusing to take responsibility. And how long they thought that, we don't know. Until down in verse 16 and 17, they finally, in their broken condition, stopped rationalizing their sin and took on full responsibility for their own disobedience. Listen to what they said. The crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us, for we have sinned. Because of this, our hearts are faint. Because of these things, our eyes grow dim. They stopped passing the buck. My friend, the practice of passing the buck has been around since the time of Adam and Eve. After the first sin in the Garden of Eden, you will recall that God approached Adam and asked him what he had done. And instead of taking responsibility for his own behavior, Adam says to God, "This woman you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit from the tree and I ate it." And Eve fared no better. For Eve said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Adam blamed the woman, and then God forgiving him the woman, and Eve blamed the serpent. Let me give you another example of self-justification and rationalization, and this one comes from the first king of Israel, King Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, the prophet Samuel tells King Saul to kill all of the Amalekites and to utterly destroy all of their possessions. And we are told this: Saul, however, spared Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and saved the best of the sheep and the oxen and the lambs and everything that was good. And so God spoke to Samuel the prophet. And he goes out to meet Saul on the battlefield. And Saul sees him and says that God's command has been obeyed. And I love what the prophet Samuel says. He says, "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? And what then is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" And Saul sort of backs up and says, well, the men did it. The troops did it. The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. In other words, Samuel, you ought to be pleased with the fact that my men and what they have done for you, for they have spared the best so that you can worship the Lord your God. And I imagine that Samuel looked in Saul's eyes as he said this. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Why is it, my friend, we will do anything on earth to keep from saying, I am responsible. I have sinned. I am guilty. Instead, we like to blame others. We like to have our substitutes, don't we? It reminds me of what Chuck Swindoll once read in the newspaper. He saw an advertisement called Rent a Jogger. The advertisement said this: rent me for $1.95 and I will jog for you at least 1 mile each day, weather permitting, for the next year. A customer gets a suitable framed certificate attesting to the world that your jogger is securing for you the benefits of a healthful glow, extraordinary stamina, an exciting muscle tone, and power-filled sense of total well-being. Rent a Jogger was the idea of a 45-year-old stockbroker who is the guy who runs for his customer. Believe it or not, within 7 days when that ad first appeared, 322 people sent him $1.95 each. When it comes to wrong, we'd like to rent a sinner, wouldn't we? We'll do anything that will keep us from saying, I have sinned. We'll cover it up, we'll hide it, we'll rationalize it. We'll blame others. We'll look for a scapegoat. Some people try to blame everything on the devil, like Eve did. Some people don't just blame Satan for every evil action. They find him in every nook and cranny, thinking that he is the subtle force behind every wicked event. Remember back about 30-some years ago when we were told that you could hear the devil in certain levels of music? I found it interesting it was only rock and roll that you could hear it. They said to us, remember, you need to play that tape or that record backwards. And then you'll be able to hear that subliminal message from Satan. That'd be like trying to read a book with a mirror or something to see the message there, right? They warned us against Procter & Gamble because of their logo. So many have believed that there was a boycott of Procter & Gamble that was pushed. I read about a Christian lady I'll never forget in Kansas City. We went to court to get her license plate changed from the letter CPG 666 because people in her church were shunning her because of that. Let me say before I move on, you and I know that there is a devil and a host of demons, an authentic prince of the power of the air, whose sole goal is to inflict and to influence us with evil. He is responsible for much of the wickedness that is in the world, but not all of it. Adam and Eve, King Saul, the Hebrews in Jerusalem, and you and me, we want to blame our sin on others. Blaming and trying to justify our behavior only compounds the seriousness of our evil. We have to accept responsibility for our actions, and in doing so, we will please the Lord and more readily receive God's grace, mercy, and forgiveness. The surviving victims of Judah's desolation lament that the Babylonians had appointed cruel taskmasters to rule over them in verse 8. The Jews also mentioned that they were risking their lives just to get bread to eat in verse 9. They ache over the fact that the Babylonians have abused them, forced young and older alike into slave labor. It's obvious that sin did not bring the Hebrews what they thought they were striving for. And that was happiness. Instead, sin robbed them of joy and turned their dancing into mourning. My friend, that is the message of Lamentations. The Bible is clear that there are consequences, there are wages for our sin. After calling on God to remember the catastrophe that had come upon them, the Jews exalt God's everlasting authority over all creation there in verse 19. You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Their knowledge of God's sovereignty then prompts them to ask why the Lord has abandoned them for so long. They feel as if God has rejected them because of their sin. And this causes them to wonder whether or not God will leave them in their present state of suffering. Ever wonder that for yourself? I know I have. Falling on the mercy of God, the Jewish captives closed their prayer by requesting the Lord to forgive their rebellion and restore them to himself. My friend, when you and I are suffering for the consequences of our sin, we frequently feel as did the Jews, abandoned by God. The marvelous and wonderful news is that our loving Lord will not, indeed cannot, forsake those who have placed their faith in him. In fact, God's desire is to restore his people, not reject them.